without adding grass. So there's a handful of different ways that you can go about doing this. You could, in fact, add grass as a tree object using LODs, which this asset that we downloaded does in fact have. If we look up grass, this asset right here, PT grass, is that the one I'm looking for? Here's the prefab. PT grass does in fact have LODs built into it. So you could add it as a tree and place it in the environment, but I actually want to show you guys how to do this normally with Unity's built-in imposter system, so that eventually after a certain distance it's not going to render that grass, it's not using LODs, it's using something else. Because the terrain tools, if you're adding a detail mesh, which grass would fall under that category, it does not support LODs. It is just using Unity's built-in culling system, so that once these details are a certain distance away from the camera, it's just not going to render them at all. So I'm going to show you how to take this prefab right here, this PT grass prefab, and we are going to create a new prefab with it just using LOD 0 so that we can use it as a detail mesh to paint all of our details. So I'm going to drag this prefab in, and you can see that we have an LOD 0 right here, which I'm going to go into my assets folder, edited prefabs. I'm just going to snag that LOD 0 and drag it right in here. Oh, whoops, I forgot to unpack the prefab. That's my bad. So here we go. So if I select the prefab and right click, prefab, unpack. There we go. Now everything isn't tied to one another. Now I can manually select this LOD 0 and drop it in right here. Let's say PT grass 02, and we'll just say this is detail. So we know it's different from that other one. So I'm just going to delete. And what we are going to do is select terrain. We're going to go to detail, edit details, add detail mesh. And we get a handful of settings here, but the first thing that we're going to do is add the grass, which I'm just going to look up detail. So that's the new one that I made. Just click that in. And we want to change this setting right here, align to ground. We want that to be 100%, because what's going to happen is if I start painting the grass texture on anything that is at an angle, like these hills over here, the grass mesh won't rotate to meet that ground. It's just going to look like it's floating in the air, and that's not going to look good. So we want it to, the mesh itself to rotate and align itself to the ground so it looks normal. And you can also change the min width, min height, max height. I'll change the max height to like 4 just so we get some nice variance. And I'm just going to click on add. So now what we can do is we can just start painting in this grass texture right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a very soft brush like this and turn up target strength, turn up brush size, and just start painting the grass in like so. And we can go relatively heavy with this. Actually, let me undo that because I want to make sure I'm following the trails that we've created here. Let's say brush size, opacity to there, brush size a little bit higher. So as I'm painting this grass, I'm not getting a lot of density out of it. You can see that, all the, the meshes are really pretty sparse. We can fix that. If we just double click on the detail mesh, we can increase detail density. And you can see those areas that I'm painting are getting denser and denser and denser. So I'm going to go to about 4. Should be good. Actually, let's tone that down just a smidge. Let's say 3.5. Yeah, that's perfect. Hit apply. And let's continue to paint. So I'm just making sure I don't have too much overlap on this little trail here. Of course, there can be some, which is totally fine. And then as I get to the outer areas here, I'll add more grass. So you can see, because the camera is a certain distance away, some of it is just not rendering, but it is in fact painting that grass all around here. And as I zoom in, you can see it show up. So that is Unity's system at work. As we are farther away from this object, eventually it will just not render it at all, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to change this brush size. I'll down shift and just start erasing some of this grass, because I don't want to cover up my trail. There we go. That's good. Play. Here we go, and you can see we got some really nice looking grass now in our scene. Might be a little too densely populated, but fortunately this is very like low res meshes here, so it's not having too much of a performance effect on our scene, but just aesthetically I think it might be a little bit too dense, but we're not going to worry about that. So let's add some finishing touches to this. So what I also want to do is I want to add a different type of grass to this. So yeah, detail mesh is, let me explain this. So detail mesh is an actual 3D object. This grass that we're using from the asset is a 3D object because it's multiple planes all together. It's exported as a 3D object, not a PNG image. But you can use flat images for grass. So if we just click on Add Grass Texture, we'll get this window right here. And we'll click on that, just type in grass, and we can start using some of these. So I'm just going to add this PT grass here. Align to ground, I want to make sure it's set to 100. And we'll leave those settings the same. Click on Add, and now I can start painting in this grass texture as well. So brush size. Make it a little smaller. And I'm going to put it right here to show you guys, because there is a unique difference between the two. Let's open this up and turn up the detail density just a little bit. I'll have it to about there. Okay. So here you can see like the difference in quality between something that's like a 3D mesh where you have multiple planes intersecting each other to create this 3D looking effect, and what a basic just 2D texture will do. Now what Unity is doing is something called billboarding. Now what that means is that it is taking this 2D object, and no matter where I look at it from, it is going to rotate that image so that it is always facing towards me. And it creates this effect of like, oh, this is actually a, 3D object in space, but in fact it isn't. This is a 2D image that is just rotating to follow me around, and it just makes it look like it's 3D, which is really cool. So let's add a couple more of these to our scene just to give our scene a little bit more biodiversity, and let's see how it looks. So I'm going to let me paint a little bit more of this in these areas here. Not too much, just something like that. And then I'm going to add another grass texture. We'll add some of these long, whatever type of grass this is called. Honestly, I have no idea. but let's go ahead and add it. Line to ground, 100%, add. And let's increase the detail density just a little bit, probably to right about there. And let's add those in. That's gonna be too much. Let's tone that down. So what's nice about painting grass textures like this is it is very, very not processing intensive, because these are just 2D images, not 3D meshes, so you can get away with adding a lot more to your scene. So here you can really clearly see the billboarding effect in action. So that's why it's best when you're placing these to place them in between, you know, actual 3D meshes of grass, because it makes it harder for you to tell that there is actually a billboarding effect happening. When it's just on the ground by itself, you can very plainly tell that this thing is rotating to follow my eye. There we go. We got a nice, beautiful scene. Let's actually add the skybox that came pre-packaged with this asset. So we'll go to Polytop Studios, environment. Where is it? Sources, textures. Nope. Oh, shaders, materials. There we go. PT skybox. We'll add that and get some nice clouds in our scene. And now what we end up with is just a very aesthetically pleasing and well assembled environment. And this is really just the beginning. I highly recommend you take the time, this is definitely missing like a cobblestone-esque texture painted sparsely in between these spaces. That would look really, really good. Particle effects and post-processing will go a long way to really make a fully lived-in space. So once you get used to this, it's very relaxing to do, very pleasing. So have fun with it, enjoy it. And I'm really excited to see the kind of environments that you guys put together. Don't go too over the top, don't overpopulate your scenes, because you can very easily crash your game trying to render too many things at once. But as you can see, you can be pretty intensive with these effects. Like, this is a large amount of objects in the scene, and my computer's doing just fine running it. So, yeah, follow along, good luck. There's one other thing I was going to mention. Oh, yes. You can also apply detail meshes with all sorts of stuff. So, for example, let's say I want to add a detail mesh and I want to add some rocks. There's some PT river rocks that came included with this that I'm just going to add in. It does have LODs enabled, so you will have to make a version that does not have LODs, because as you can see, this detail mesh LOD is not supported. However, remember, you can also add these things as trees that support LODs. So I could go to edit trees, add tree, look for that game object, river rock, add, and I can start painting in these rocks to the scene. And they behave appropriately. I can change the settings of them, you know, the height, the density, things like that. So let me change brush size. Yeah, I can just start placing a few rocks here and there just to add some more life to the scene. Obviously, these rocks aren't very good looking. They aren't using PBR materials like we are. It's just a very basic, you know, gray shader. But you can make your own. You know, you can pull in your own rocks or use the rocks that I created and gave to you. You can add those in as trees and place them in the environment as well. So very helpful to be able to do that. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this series. Thank you for following along, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to make.